Hello, I'm Roderick Davis with Cool Feed. We're here at the New Orleans Jazz Museum, housing the old U.S. Mint. And oh boy, do I have a story for you. Let's go inside. Here you can learn about one of the most innovative, influential musical art forms in world history. We've heard all about the great musicians who helped shape jazz music and make it one of New Orleans' greatest gifts to the world. Louis Armstrong, Fats Domino, Pete Fountain. There's a lot to celebrate. But there's also a dark side to the history of jazz. In fact, there's even a darker side to this museum. In addition to the jazz exhibits, hidden in this building lies an old jail cell. And this is appropriate because buried in the history of jazz music is the story of one of the greatest crime sprees in New Orleans history. One figure we have to give credit for making jazz music catch on with the masses wasn't a famous musician at all, but rather the worst serial killer in New Orleans history. This is the story of the Axeman's jazz.
Let's back up just a little bit. First, to understand how a serial killer helped popularize jazz music, you have to understand that jazz music didn't always garner the respect and admiration it has today.
While it would later be considered a revolutionary new art form, in its early days, it was actually considered low-brow music.
Jazz originated in New Orleans in the 1890s. For its first 2 decades, it was regulated to the music halls and the gambling halls of the supposedly less desirable neighborhoods, considered by the upper classes to be less than respectable.
What are they calling those awful noises from those filthy dance halls? Jazz music? Just hogwash for the dregs of society.
This was the attitude of a lot of New Orleans in this era. But in 1918, a series of Axemans began, which would eventually change the relationship between New Orleans and jazz forever.
Okay, this is where the story takes a weird turn.
And trust me, it's going to get weirder. But bear with us, and we'll explain how a serial killer helped popularize jazz music.
The murders began May 23rd, 1918. An Italian grocer, Joseph Maggio, and his wife were brutally bludgeoned to death by an actually maniac. The killer chiseled out door panels in the back door and slowly crept and killed the Maggios in their bed.
A couple of blocks away, written on a sidewalk in chalk, was a message to police. Mrs. Maggio was set up tonight, just like Mrs. Tony.
Initially, the authorities were perplexed.
Police dug through the records and found that Mr. and Mrs. Tony Chiambria were murdered in a similar way in 1912. They were afraid a serial killer was on the loose, but they wanted to keep it low-key and not send the city into a panic.
But just 1 month later, their fears were realized. Another double axe attack with the telltale signs that it was the same villain.
Chiseled out door panel, axe left at the scene, the city was sent into a panic.
Families began sleeping and guarding their homes in shifts, watching their porches with shotguns.
2 of my neighbors came home without chiseled out door panels in their back door. Must have been that Axeman. Well, he wouldn't make through my door. If I got anything to do with it.
The police had tried to keep these murders under wraps, but after a third murder, Detective D'Antonio spilled the beans to the press.
The Axeman is a modern-day Jekyll and Hyde. A criminal of this type may be a respectable, law-abiding citizen with his normal self. Compelled by an impulse to kill, he must obey this urge. Some years ago, they had a number of cases all bearing such strong resemblance to the current outbreak that the same fiend is responsible.
Do you think he's gonna strike again?
Like Jack the Ripper, this sadist may go on with his periodic outbreaks until his death. For months, even years, he'll be perfectly normal, and then go on another rampage.
The lack of a clear suspect was really getting under the skin of the police superintendent, Frank Mooney.
I am convinced that the Romano murders are the work of a madman, an accidental degenerate who has no robbery motive, but who is taking small sums to throw police off track. Take this as gospel. We're going to get him yet. I am doing everything in human power to run down this murderous maniac. This series of outrages is the biggest crime in New Orleans police history.
The only survivors and witnesses of the attack described the madman as unusually light on his feet, running away as if he had wings.
After 5 murders, the final chiseled-out door panel was found in September of 1918. Then the killer lay silent for 6 months.
That is, until March of 1919, when the Axeman attacked the Cormiglia family in Gretna.
Just across the Mississippi River from downtown New Orleans. It was a particularly brutal crime, and the city was sent into a bigger panic than ever before.
And this is where the story really takes a strange turn.
The Cortamiglias were attacked about a week before St. Joseph's Day, which remains a major holiday for Italians in New Orleans to this day.
And the St. Joseph's celebration of 1919 would be like no other before or since.
That Sunday, before St. Joseph's, the Times-Picayune published a letter to the city of New Orleans, the first threat from the killer himself, speaking directly to the people of New Orleans.
He claimed to be a demon from hell.
He mocked the police and their investigation.
And claimed he could murder 1,000 citizens at any time, since he was a close friend of the Angel of Death.
Then came the part that changed New Orleans and its relationship with jazz forever.
He expressed his fondness for jazz music.
And claimed that when he passed over New Orleans on St. Joseph's Eve, in anyone's house where a jazz band was in full swing, everyone would be spared.
But anyone who was not jazzing up that night would get the axe.
Any excuse for a party, right, New Orleans?
People pooled their resources, grabbed any jazz players off the street.
And that night on St. Joseph's Eve, New Orleans was a big old jazz party. Pretty much every man, woman, and child in New Orleans were jazzing it up.
12:15 came and went,
And everybody in the city was spared.
and boogieing to jazz music, a true New Orleans original,
Crossed racial, class, and neighborhood lines for the first time.
Shortly after the letter, Joseph DeVilla released some sheet music called The Mysterious Axeman's Jazz.
it sold like hotcakes.
How convenient.
The mysteries of who the killer was or what motivated these murders remains unsolved.
I'm looking at you, Joseph DeVilla.
One thing we know for sure, in addition to the great musical heroes that popularized jazz music, a little credit must go to our greatest villains as well.
Come on, boy, play that trumpet. The jazz Axeman is coming. For my life, I'm gonna keep on strumming. The jazz Axeman is coming. Here's a dark tale. It's not a disease.